the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
Hello, Sublation Media viewers. It's I, Douglas Lain, author of Fall Into Time and Pick Your Battle. I'm just going to name random books that I've written. Also, the head of Sublation Media. With me today is Ashley Frawley. Ashley, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ashley Frawley. I'm a sociologist at the University of Kent. I'm a columnist at Compact Magazine and visiting researcher at MCC Brussels. I am the author of 2 books and about 100 other articles and journal articles and chapters and da-da-da-da-da. And that's me. And we have with us Benjamin Studebaker. How would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, introduce yourself, Benjamin.
Oh, I'm a political theorist. I did my PhD at Cambridge. I have written 2 books, The Chronic Crisis of American Democracy, The Way Is Shut, and my newest book out with Edinburgh University Press this month, Legitimacy in Liberal Democracies.
Great. Well, today we're going to be talking about the election, of course. Benjamin and I went to Chicago and Milwaukee for the DNC and the RNC to film there, to create this documentary film, which right now I'm thinking we might title it The Last Election. What do you think about that title? I've been kicking around titles. What do you think of that one?
Unlikely.
You know, well, no, it's not likely to really be the last election, but
people will think that you actually think that, and then when it's not the last election, it will diminish the credibility of the film.
Dang, because there's one of the reasons we were interested in making this film, or the inspirations for this film, are these 2 now very old documentaries. One from 1992 called the Last Party, and the other one is from 2000. It's called The Party's Over. Right?
Yeah, young people don't know those movies, and we also don't do irony. We're very literal. So we won't understand the joke, and we won't appreciate it.
Well, maybe I'll just make this for older people then. Anyhow,
God, you're just coming out swinging today, aren't you?
But before we dive into any more about the documentary, and I will reconsider The Last Election as the title. Why don't we just talk about the other thing that I mentioned at random in the title for this stream, which is, are we at a moment where we need to rethink what it means to be on the left and the right? Or is there a realignment happening not only in the American political parties, but also historically, such that some of our presuppositions need to be re-examined? Like, what does it mean to be right-wing, and what does it mean to be left-wing today? Someone says, Doug, go back to the Pixies and name it This Monkey's Gone to Heaven. Okay. Or, yeah, that that sounds good to me. I don't think it communicates the theme of the film or the topic, but all right. So, Ben, what do you think? Do we need to rethink what it means to be on the right and what it means to be on the left today?
Well, we already needed to do that. We should have done that, in 2020 at least? Maybe in 2016? Maybe back in 2008? We probably should have done that every election. I remember in 2020, we had a major disagreement, me and Amy Therese, when we were doing What's Left, about how to respond to that moment and whether a realignment was occurring, and if so, what was the character of that realignment. And I had the position that while things were changing, they were not changing such that you could just flip from, say, tailing the Democratic Party to tailing the Republican Party, or pivoting from being left-coded to being right-coded. And I think that oftentimes when the language of realignment is used, people think that that's what you're talking about. That you're talking about treating the Republican Party as the party that's more friendly to the workers or more friendly to Medicare for all or what have you. As Batia Ungar-Sargon, who we interviewed while we were out at the conventions, argued. And I don't think that that's what you would mean by a realignment. But I think a lot of people who hear realignment and hear the realignment conversation think that that's what we mean or that's what we're talking about. It's certainly not what I would mean or what I would be talking about. So maybe some clarification about what does a realignment mean? It doesn't mean changing who you're tailing, right?
No, it certainly doesn't mean changing who you're tailing. But it does mean, I think, as we cease to tail the Democrats, we need to look at our assumptions and try to discover which ones are products of the fact that we've been tailing the Democrats. Which ones of these assumptions come from really the Democratic Party's own ideology, and which ones would still hold for a socialist. So, as an example, the question of whether or not to support efforts to deregulate or to shrink the size of government should be reconsidered in the face of breaking from the Democrats, which have tended to always couch progress in terms of expanding the realm of the state, as if that would be what socialism would mean.
Right, but socialism also wouldn't mean just flipping that and being for negating the state and shrinking its role, right? We want to think about these things more seriously than we've tended to because we've operated on the premise that the only party that we can influence is the Democratic Party, right? So we want to question these things and be more dialectical and both-sided about them and see potentialities in different ways forward and look for other possibilities. But I do think that one of the things that tends to happen is that people flatten all of this out. So they go, well, if you're no longer pro-regulation, then you have to be anti-regulation. If you're no longer stupid in way A, then you have to be stupid in way B.
Well, I would say that ultimately socialists are aiming at overcoming the state. And so but then the question becomes, do you overcome the state by the kinds of deregulation that the Republicans might be advocating for? And then the answer, I think, would be no. But yeah, I do agree. You're not just going to flip over to be supportive of deregulation, but what you shouldn't see it as is a rolling back of the progress that socialism or socialist movements have made, because it is not that.
Yeah, I would frame the modern state the same way we frame capitalism, right? We want to overcome both of these forms, but to overcome them, we have to tarry with them and go through them to get beyond them, right? We don't just negate capitalism or negate abstract value and try to return to the concrete. And in the same way, we don't just negate the state or negate the modern state or the administrative state. We have to in some way tarry with that and look for ways to work through the problem of it for the purposes of overcoming it. But the tendency is usually to either affirm or negate the state or to affirm or negate capitalism. And I think both of those tendencies are easy to replicate. People will often be able to recognize that we can't just affirm or negate capitalism. They'll say, well, anti-capitalism is an undialectical response, right? But then when we shift the conversation to the state, people don't tend to think about it in the same complicated way. And all of a sudden it becomes really flat.
Well, maybe that's me, but well, Ashley, what do you think here about rethinking what constitutes a right-wing position and a left-wing position today? And would you even put it in these terms, like a matter of being about deregulation or the size of the state, or?
I don't know.
Ashley?
It's so difficult because at some point, you want to say that these.
We've got a delay.
I think there must be. Yeah, there's a delay on the line, which is really, really annoying. Perhaps I might try to leave and come back in and see if that solves it. But anyways, if you can hear me, it's very difficult because sometimes you want to say that there is that left and right have lost their meaning. And I always respond by saying, like, well, what's happened is the left wing of the old political spectrum, going back to the Enlightenment, to the French Revolution at least, has collapsed. And what we have are like leftish and right versions of what was the old right. So you have like a kindly kind of cultural version of what is essentially conservatism, and you have a far right version which biologizes and is harsh and all of these sorts of things. And then sometimes, none of our political parties and the stances that they take make sense even within any kind of spectrum. And then it seems like there's this soul searching, and people kind of come back and they try to reassert kind of left-wing values of some sort, but it often seems to be a facade. So to give you the example that I know best, which is obviously the UK as a comparison, we have had now the Labour government's won the most recent election, and they are trying very hard to, people say, oh, wow, this sounds like old style socialism, because they're trying to raise taxes, but they promised they wouldn't raise taxes on working people. So they don't say workers, but they say working people. That's their workaround. And but actually, the taxes that they have raised are indirectly taxes on working people, because at the end of the day, like national insurance or whatever, the companies aren't going to be like, oh gosh, I'll just have to take a hit in my profits. They're going to freeze wages. They're going to let workers go. And the estimate is that like 80% of it's going to be paid for by workers anyway. But this is kind of, I feel like sometimes, I was on Times Radio yesterday, and I was sort of talking about this, and I was thinking, how do I say this without sounding like a lunatic Leninist, right? Like, or people were complaining about the monarchy, and that the big scandal is that they found out that the monarchy owns like a ton of land that is being leased to like charities and rented out to the NHS, and they're just making millions. And I was like, wow, everybody's shocked to learn that money isn't 100% organically sourced, and that's kind of the way that it is in capitalism. What are you going to do with the mainstream parties? You're kind of limited. It all becomes a facade. So the Republicans look left because they are talking to the workers, but it's just rhetoric. It's just language. And the left sounds left because they are trying to say, well, what am I supposed to say to sound like a leftist? And I'm not sure if there's anywhere in politics where there's content. And I'm not sure, maybe that's way too cynical. No, correct me if I'm wrong. Is that too cynical?
Well, I'm curious just to know what was most controversial about the fact that the monarchy, which is is there based on their holdings and their that they would own land and rent it out. Why was that considered such a controversy?
Because they were always really tight-lipped about exactly what is on the land that they own, like what properties do they actually own. And then there was this big expose where can't remember, it might have been the Times, basically figured out exactly what they owned, and it turned out they owned like air over a bridge that they're charging a city council like $100,000 a year for, and they, millions from the NHS. Prince Charles is like the patron of, I can't remember, some group, something like Boy Scouts, I don't know, and he's charging them for the buildings, So he seemed the only legitimacy that the monarchy has managed to cultivate is this facade of charitable giving, of philanthropy, and sort of drawing attention to different causes. But it turns out they're siphoning off a humongous amount from those very causes, in addition to what's actually taken from taxes. But I mean, what do people think? That's how capitalism works. That when you own land, that's how the money is made for you. You charge people to use it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Like they and like to rectify the situation, they think it's possible to rectify it. Even to get angry about this, you're saying it's possible to rectify this within the current parameters of our society. It's not. That's just how our society works. So when I was talking about it on the radio, I felt like I was just, what do you want me to say here? This is capitalism. But you can't really say that, right? So it's like, that's all I said was like, wow, everyone is shocked to learn that money's dirty. Like, I mean, that's just, no matter what, it's going to come from exploitation in some way, shape, or form. And you can have this wonderful charitable facade. But, that's kind of how the mainstream operates. We all pretend like we don't really know. So like the same thing happened with COVID, when everyone was, during lockdowns, everyone was drawing attention to the fact that there are people in high rises with, mold growing on the walls, and while rich people were enjoying their beautiful gardens, and they're like, wow, oh my God, look at all this inequality. As though inequality didn't exist before that, as though people didn't exist in high rises with leaks and mold and horrible things. But it allows us to pretend, every time there's a big outbreak, it allows us to pretend like these things are transgressing our values. They are breaking something in society that wasn't there before, and in that way we can all affirm the values again and pretend like this is just a problem that comes out of nowhere. Normally it's not like this, but now it is. Oh yeah, so that's the sort of the monarchy thing. And it's just interesting because we all know this, and we play a game like we don't know. And I think this leaks into politics as well. Like, we all know that, like, Kamala's, on the side of billionaires, but so is Trump. We all know this, but we're all going to play a game like somebody's really on our side. It's so incredibly cynical, because nobody is shocked to learn that none of these people are on your side. But we would lose our minds if you said it out loud. Not a single one of these people is for you. Not a single one of them. Well, it's like, well, what do we do then? None of this is going to save us.
Benjamin, what do you think? Just going to go to you instead of letting, because I could respond, but I want you to respond.
Yeah, I think there is a hollowness to these corruption narratives where people pretend as if this isn't, endemic to the system and necessary to it in most cases. My point would be just that this should be extended more vociferously than it is to thinking about the state. People are willing to go, well, of course, capitalism produces all kinds of corrupt, exploitative arrangements. Nonetheless, we have to work through it, and we can't just reject it and negate it, right? This is widely recognized by Marxists. The horrors of capitalism come with the benefits and have to be worked through. But when we start talking about the Bonapartist state, all of a sudden, there is a nostalgia for a world before that existed, and an attempt to politically react to that as a form, and an unwillingness to tarry with or be dialectical about that structure.
Well, I'm willing to try. One thing that struck me is that when you're asking politicians to represent the people, or us, or the working class, then you're letting the working class or the people off the hook, because in fact they really are representing us. They're representing us in all of our contradictions and all of the ways in which we set about creating a society that's at odds with itself, that produces great wealth and poverty, or that wants to bring all the workers of the world together to manufacture and reproduce the world, but also insists upon there being very firm divisions and even violent conflicts. So when we look to the state, and when we look to our politics, capitalist politics as they are, we should think about how what's developing is a product of our own activity, what both politically on the left and also as productive workers. So in that sense, when we see this anti-state sentiment rising up, when we see a desire to do something about the administrative state, to deregulate, to roll back the power of especially the unelected bureaucracies, when we watch poor Peanut the squirrel being murdered in his bed, we should take that up as an expression of our own activity and our own contradictions, and try to think it through.
See, it's not really any different from taking up the grievances of the progressive liberals, right? Because in both cases, you're dealing with a reactionary symptom that is about frustration with the alienated character of the political, right? The alienated character of capitalism and the alienated character of the modern state go hand in hand. They're both alienated, right? The modern state both is representative in some senses of us and is radically not representative of us in other senses, because it always exists in this at least part alienated context. And so there's always this desire to eliminate or overcome that alienation. And yet if you don't have some kind of positive way of working through the modern state, this is expressed in various forms of reaction that take the form of anarchism, right? And this is the sense in which anarchism and Bonapartism are kissing cousins. They're both very one-sided kinds of expressions of either affirming the modern state as it rises up out of society or negating the modern state as it rises up out of society. And they need each other and they feed each other in practice. The more anarchism we have and the more we talk in this kind of way, the more it will produce this other very statist, very Bonapartist response. Tocqueville talks about this in Ancient Regime and the Revolution, how you switch between, because you have this anarchy, you have this desire for despotism that comes in reaction to the one-sidedness of the anarchy. And in the same way, the kind of J.D. Vance, Vivek Ramaswamy tango that is going on within the Republican Party is making both sides of that division more and more acrimonious. You have this on the one hand, Vivek is this very Malay style, rip up all of the administrative state and create a free and open market, right? And then the other side, you have J.D. Vance, who's more of a Maloney, Orban, use the state to protect a notion of a culture, a notion of an ethnic group or a language group or whatever it is that he thinks exists in primordial cultural land where people like him construct their bullshit ontologies, right? These two different visions are very, very different from each other. They both involve challenges to the administrative state, but they pull in very opposite directions, and they're both dumping gasoline on one another. And when Trump is gone, which whether it's now or in 4 years or in 8 years, these two different impulses, to get rid of the administrative state, to open up a world of liberalism, and to mess around the administrative state for the purposes of making something that is coherent and ethnic. These are very different visions for what the right's project is. And the right itself is very badly divided about that. And then both of those projects exclude the Christian right, which doesn't find itself easily at home in either of those two projects.
I'm not sure I agree with your characterization of Vance as wanting to create an ethnic state or an ethnic society that coheres on that basis. But I would say that from what I've heard from him, and maybe you can correct me, what he wants to do is create an American society that would have an ethos of liberalism that would be protected from other cultures and where the national boundaries would be firm. And also where there would be a lot of protection for American industry in the effort to onshore. But
those are two very different visions of liberalism, right? The Vivek, open trade, open flows, free movement view is quite different from the protectionism, close the border, and think in terms of demographics. Vance very explicitly, thinks in terms of immigration as a as a way of changing the voting population, immigration as a way of suppressing wages, immigration as a way of changing the blood character of the country. That book that he wrote that the liberals love, they love because it's a racecraft book in which he essentializes about ethnic groups on the basis of which part of Europe they come from. He divides white people up into a bunch of different groups based on when they migrated over from Europe and which parts of Europe they come from, and then he makes all kinds of sweeping generalizations about these groups on that basis in that book. He's very much a kind of racecrafty, in many ways very similar to someone like Elizabeth Warren. I always used to argue that Vance and Warren were basically the same person. They have basically the same politics. Then on the other side, you've got Vivek, who I do think offers a very different image. Now, yes, in one sense, they're all liberal capitalist politicians. These are different iterations of liberalism and capitalism, and these are disagreements that are had within the right and within liberalism about what should the relationship between the state and society be. But this is part of where we can really start to get interesting. We can start to drill into some of these differences instead of operating at the level of Democrats versus Republicans, of pro versus anti, right? Because as soon as one of these people actually wins, whether it's a Trump administration or a Harris administration, there's all these divisions within both of the party camps that open up. And while we can zoom out and go, they're just all liberal capitalist politicians, and that is true. We can also zoom in and see there are quite sharp different visions for how all of this should be constructed, and the conflicts that will occur inside the administrations and between the administrations and Congress over these things will be extremely generative in terms of what they produce. What we're going to have over the course of the next 4 years, 8 years, will be very much shaped by these internal conflicts that will occur within the Republican Party, within the Democratic Party, among people who will present publicly like they're on the same side, but in practice, behind closed doors, very nearly want to kill each other. The Trump administration always was very factionalist. Even the first Trump administration had the kind of establishment Republican Reince Priebus faction. It had the Jared Kushner, Ivanka, soft Democrat faction. And then it also had the Steve Bannon alt-right, close the borders, do the Muslim ban faction. And these people were constantly fighting each other all the time. And Trump is trying to put a unifying face on it in public, but oftentimes they're coming to him with radically different notions of what to do that sharply conflict with each other, and he's having to try to somehow navigate this and fit it all together. Which of course he couldn't do because the contradictions were enormous and the administration was mostly paralyzed and failed to do all kinds of things that it sought to do because there were too many divisions within it. And that even leaves aside the conflict between the administration as a whole and the bureaucracy, the CIA, the FBI, the intelligence services, right? And that was also going on. And then you've got the media, you've got the Democrats, you've got that stuff. But the stuff that people don't pay attention to that occurs inside, the court politics, the intra-party conflicts, that's where the real meat is in American politics.
Okay, I don't disagree with a good portion of what you just said, but I wonder if you could point to, and maybe I missed it and you said it, where those divisions are within the Democratic Party. And because it seems to me that I always thought that someone like Sohrab Ahmari, and now also J.D. Vance, were the final kind of accomplishments of the Bernie Sanders Social Democratic American left. That this was where that turn led. This is where we were led to these kinds of figures, and I don't think Vivek Ramaswamy is in any way related to that movement, right? It isn't coming out of the same impulse, but it seems to me that in the Democratic Party, the way a left version of these conflicts would be expressed has been suppressed much more effectively, and that there really isn't division within the Democratic Party, except maybe along the lines of, around the Israeli crimes against the Palestinians, but that's managed through basically a kind of spoilage system through NGOs to the various ethnic constituencies. But what do you think of that? And take that apart, if you will. And Ashley, I will give you a chance to speak again. Sorry, it's an American day, Ashley.
No, I know, and I'm sitting here like trying to rack my brain for a decent thought because I got some good drugs today. Because I had to do a medical procedure and I didn't know. I had no idea. I thought it was just like this basic thing. And they're like, "Oh, we have to knock you out." And I was like, "The what?" So I thought it's been like 7 hours, but I'm sitting here like, why are my thoughts like little mice that I'm trying to catch?
Well, I mean, that's
like
your mic is.
Every brain cell.
We've got some audio issues in this episode altogether right now.
Oh.
Like your mic is a little staticky. Benjamin's fan is running. And I don't know about what noises are going on in the background here.
And I'm on drugs. It's just chaotic. Let me try to fix my microphone.
Join the club. I'm having some coffee. All right. So anyway, Ben, tell me what I was doing wrong.
As I move my microphone further away from my laptop. Yeah. So I think that the Democratic Party has done a better job concealing the divisions within it in the media. And certainly this was our experience at the conventions. When we asked Democrats about the divisions, they were very coy and not really wanting to express what the divisions are. Often they would just emphasize an organic character to the party, or if they did acknowledge division, they would go the more progressive people versus the less progressive people, as if it's just a matter of degree. And the reporters, the media, are not interested in highlighting the divisions because they think it's counterproductive, because most of them want the Democrats elected, and so they don't want to encourage any infighting. So the quality of reporting on the Democratic administrations has been inferior. Nevertheless, some stuff has come out over time. A lot of it has been in terms of complaints about competency. Like we know, for instance, that the people around Joe Biden think that Harris is incompetent, and therefore they tried to put her on the border as a way of getting her out of the way and getting her less media attention. And then she managed to find ways to botch media appearances that they thought were unbotchable, and this further aggravated them. Axios has been a good source of information on the Biden administration's point of view vis-a-vis Harris or other factions within the Democratic Party. And it has occasionally reported on some of the differences, but only when it's advantageous to Biden, because Axios is very much on the side of Biden within those disputes. It has ties to Biden, to the Biden administration. But we do know, for instance, that during the Obama administration, there were all kinds of very sharp conflicts within the party, not just about, say, whether or not to do a second stimulus package, but about, say, what the appropriate response was to Gaddafi or to the rise of the Islamic State in Syria. We know, for instance, that John Kerry repeatedly came to Obama and tried to persuade Obama to do an operation in Syria to take out Assad, and that Obama repeatedly refused to listen to John Kerry. That was a quite major foreign policy dispute within the Obama administration. We also know that Obama blamed Hillary Clinton for his decision to have done Libya because he listened to her, and that had a lot to do with why she was pushed out subsequently, or why she decided to go, or whatever happened there. It's a little bit vague as to why exactly Hillary left, or what the conditions were under which she left. But it had a lot to do with Obama not liking what happened in Libya. And then that had to be downplayed because she subsequently became the nominee. And in his memoir, he's blaming David Cameron. He's blaming the French and the British. He's trying to find some other way of talking about it. There were really significant divisions. I remember in 2009, Paul Krugman appearing on the cover of Newsweek, the loyal opposition, this argument about stimulus and whether the stimulus had gone far enough. I think recently the interests of socialists, particularly in our space, has been more to do with the administrative state and more to do with deregulation. And so the disputes that go on in the Democratic Party are not being litigated in terms that are as interesting to us currently. And therefore we are not following them as closely. And because the media isn't covering them, we are not being encouraged to think about them very much. A lot more of the attention has been on the Republican Party and potential disputes within the Republican Party, and the Republican Party is much more open about airing its disputes. So to some degree, I think we've been sucked in a little bit by that. Our preoccupations are fitting with what the Republican Party is wanting to talk about, and so that's leading us into engaging more with those disputes. But they're certainly going on in the Democratic Party. It's just that we as socialists are tired of talking to the DSA types. We're tired of talking to the AOC squad types. We think we aren't getting anything by talking to them. And so we want to talk about other things for a while. But I'm not sure we're going to get any further with that than we did with what we were doing to start with.
Well, I'm not sure how far we're going to get, but one thing that struck me about what you just said was that when you described the Republican Party's internal disputes, they were pretty profoundly ideological. The difference between a vision of how government should function, what kind of society that we wanted to have, whether it was going to be on the Vivek Ramaswamy side, who of all the players in the Republican Party, I like Vivek Ramaswamy. I don't like everything he stands for, but I feel kinship with him in his style. And then so Vivek Ramaswamy, the good liberal who wants a society of free trade, free association, constitutional protections to establish that. And then on the other side, someone like J.D. Vance who wants more of a civic nationalism, one which is going to be protected not only from immigrants undermining workers' wages or something like that, but also from cultural influence, I think, from other parts of the world and even from within, to return to a more traditional way of life which is still defined as a bourgeois way of life. So you got these divisions within the Republican Party that we can outline roughly along those lines. And then when the Democratic Party, it's all a matter of tactics, or the overall aims are the same, but should we try this or should we try that? Should we go and bomb this country or should we go and bomb that country? Who is competent amongst us? Whether, who can type more words per minute or appear on television in a more charismatic way, rather than any kind of ideological dispute within the Democratic Party, as you described it. So what did you leave out?
Oh, I don't think that's true. I think that the neoconservatives are now Democrats, and there are lots of Democrats who have quite sharply different views about foreign policy. And I don't think it's reducible to which countries you bomb, which countries you don't bomb. Maybe it looks that way from the socialist point of view that's zoomed very far away. Mm-hmm. But to them, eminently, these are incredibly significant disagreements. You've got Liz Cheney in a party with members of the Squad who are sympathetic to the Palestinians. You've got a vision of foreign policy. Some people around Harris have a view that the United States should really pull back from foreign policy entanglements to a very significant degree. There are advisors that are quite close to Harris who have expressed very much retrenchment positions. These are people who are considered ideological opponents by the Bidenites. The Bidenites have a very maximalist foreign policy relative to some of the people immediately around Harris. Now, it's very difficult to assess whether a president changes foreign policy, because we never see what would have happened if someone else had been in office at the same historical moment. So it's very difficult to litigate whether ideological differences on foreign policy are as important as people claim that they are. And you can make the argument that they're not as significant as they may seem. But I think there are very sharply different visions of foreign policy within the Democratic Party. I mean, this is a party that had some people arguing for doing the Trans-Pacific Partnership not so long ago, and offering carrots to all of the Pacific states, free trade carrots to all of the Pacific states. And then you've got other people in that party who have very different views about how to deal with China. There are people in the Democratic Party who think that China should still be engaged. You've got people in the Democratic Party who think that China needs to be contained. There are really big differences, I think, on foreign policy still. Not that will necessarily always be what interests us or what's most significant to us given our political interests. But I do think it matters.
It's also not what is most interesting to the American public or the voting public, because it's not about them ultimately, right? So it's not. So again, now I'll agree that, I don't understand what the global vision is within the Democratic Party. Like, what makes the difference between being pro-Palestinian or pro-Israel within the Democratic Party? Like, I accept in so much as maybe there's some remnants of anti-imperialist socialism within the Democratic Party. Like, we want it, but I'm not sure that would be a good characterization for it. But
yeah, I wouldn't call it that.
Right. Well, in which case, I don't understand the practical aims for the United States within the Democratic Party of the pro-Palestinian Democrats. I don't know what they are or what vision. I'm not saying they aren't there. I'm just saying I don't see any practical benefit for the United States that's being expressed in the pro-Palestinian position. It's just being expressed in purely, moral terms, which I agree with. We shouldn't be wiping whole people out, right? We shouldn't be.
Yeah, I don't think that's the significant difference. I think the Palestine issue in terms of the party is not the significant difference. In terms of what the public talks about and what the kids on the campus talk about, sure, fine, whatever. But in terms of the party itself, the real divisions are about China, about whether to continue to engage with China or to contain it. If you're going to contain it, do you contain it by doing carrots, the Obama-style TPP pivot, which is about encouraging states in Asia to be friendly with us by offering them trade concessions? Or do you adopt something that's more like the Republicans, where you use punitive tariffs to try to diminish trade with China, to push companies to move out of China so as to escape the tariffs, right? You can try to decouple from China with carrots or sticks, Or you can say that we should continue to engage with China, that trade with China is good, and you can remain committed to a kind of 90s view that over time, by engaging China, positive things will happen, and that if we stop engaging with China, we're potentially risking a major war. Right? These are, I think, very significant differences, but they don't get talked about by the kids or the media or anybody who is really following this election, because this election has become incredibly stupid. The conversation around it has become juvenile and insipid, so nobody actually pays attention to what's really at stake in any of this. The move from Biden to Harris is a potentially significant move if it is the case that these advisors around Harris are actually able to do what they have written about wanting to do in terms of retrenchment and having the United States not be so involved in trying to do containment in East Asia, and to instead have it be more pulled back and to just protect a system of global trade, an open flows system, and to only protect that system and to not to try to meddle anywhere else. That would be a significant change in emphasis, especially with regard to East Asia, if they actually do the kinds of things they've talked about doing. But we've never even properly talked about whether the advisors around Harris mean the things they say. People don't even know what those advisors are saying. It's never discussed. The New York Times, the Washington Post, nobody reports on it. We don't talk about it. Academics and intellectuals and historians and political scientists, they don't talk about it. Everybody is having such a stupid conversation right now that what's actually at stake in the election is not on the table at all. I'm probably mentioning this the first time many people who are listening will have heard any of this discussed in public. And it's the day of the election.
Well, what I'm curious about is why you think, and then I want to show a clip from the documentary, why do you think it is that Kamala Harris has not managed to make her case that she is distinct from the president in ways that would matter, and particularly in the ways that you expressed? Like, what?
It's not in her interest to do that.
You already gave the answer to that, Doug. Foreign policy doesn't win elections. Like that's in an election that, particularly one that's so defined by personality. You're not going to start banging on about boring things like China and da-da-da, or I don't know. You'd have to find a way to sex it up, like how Trump tried to do. You know, he tried to put it in American terms. That's the most that you can do for foreign policy.
An anti-war candidate can do quite well in a
yeah,
US
because
election.
it affects you. It affects you.
Right. Well,
if we have troops deployed, we don't have troops deployed to these zones. So the American interest in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or the Ukraine-Russia conflict is a tiny fraction of what it was for Iraq or Vietnam. Because there aren't troops deployed. American lives are not immediately at stake.
But Trump is running as the peace candidate, as the free speech candidate, as the anti-bureaucracy candidate, as probably as a sexist candidate, return to traditional values.
Well, I went to these two rallies, right? In this last week, I went to a Trump rally in Milwaukee, the one where he was complaining about the microphone, and I went to see Harris in Lansing, because I live in Indiana and I can get access to both swing states in a short car trip, right? Mm-hmm. What Trump was doing the weave. What was at the center of the Trump weave? At the center of the Trump weave was the idea that Harris is incompetent and stupid and has bad judgment. That's really what he's running on. He's running on Harris and the Democrats are incompetent. They will make bad policy, which will increase the cost of living, and they'll let a bunch of immigrants into the country. That's really what he's running on. There's the stuff that we are interested in talking about that we see in relation to him that is interesting and captivating to us. But what he's actually running on, what you actually hear if you go to a Trump rally, is a lot of talk about the cost of living, immigration, and the stupidity and incompetence of Kamala as a human being. Those are the things that he talks about and consistently weaves in and out, right? What's Harris running on? Abortion.
Well, yeah.
Principally abortion. Freedom from the Handmaid's Tale. That's the thing that is at the center of what she's talking about. What is she warning you about? Democracy and abortion. These are things that will be taken away if you don't vote for her, according to her narrative, right? So the stuff that is interesting to us when we watch this, it's not what they're actually running on. It's not how they imminently understand themselves. It's not how most of their supporters understand what's going on. It's we're socialists, so we have these preoccupations. But they're not actually interested in what interests us. Our concepts are not interesting to them. They don't think in our concepts. And we had all these problems when we were trying to do the Bernie thing, right? The Democrats don't think in our concepts, don't actually share our goals. The same is true for these other people in the Republican Party. Nobody is actually interested in what we care about at all.
Did you watch the Joe Rogan 3-hour interview with Trump? Did you watch the J.D. Vance 3-hour interview with Joe Rogan? Did you hear the comments that he made recently about Lynn Cheney? The being a peace candidate may not have come up at that rally, although there was a weave, you say, so I bet it did.
He mentioned it briefly, but it's not the thing that he kept coming back to. It's one of the branches in and amongst all the rest of it.
Right, but that branch was highlighted and lifted up recently because of his comments about...
He also armed the Ukrainians. He also threatened Putin personally to attack him, to bomb his house. He also talked about putting nuclear submarines in the Black Sea up against the coast of Ukraine, right?
But now you're taking me to say that he is a peace candidate. I'm not saying that he is a peace candidate. I'm saying he is running as a peace candidate. And the whole reason I brought that up was why couldn't Kamala, as a part of what she's doing, in order to distinguish herself from Biden, mention that. And even if it isn't the thing that's going to matter most to the American voting public, it would nonetheless be a way for her to say there is a difference between Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. And here's one of the differences.
Because actually a lot of these people want her to be on the side of the Ukrainians and to be on the side of Israel. There are substantial numbers of people in this country who actually want those things, right? That's why when the debate moderator is asking Trump about Ukraine, they think it's a good question to go, do you actually want Ukraine to win or not, right? They think that's a gotcha moment. They think that because they think there's a sizable number of people in the country who think that you are in some way un-American if you aren't on the side of Ukraine. And think about this. People have been putting these flags in their profiles. And this includes many socialists. They stick the Gaza flag, or they stick, in some cases, even the Russian flag in their profiles, and they take sides in these conflicts. The set of people who want peace is a significant part of the American public. But most people in the U.S. population are not focused on these conflicts at all. And of the people who are focused on them, a very, very sizable number are on a side and want somebody to win and somebody to lose. There's a lot of warmongering in public discourse at this point. There are a lot of people who are actively for the destruction of one of the sides. There are people who want to see Russia partitioned. There are people who want to see Ukraine conquered. There are people who want to see Hamas destroyed. There are people who want to see Israel destroyed. It's not at all clear that you are going to benefit electorally by heavily emphasizing peace.
All right, listen, I've got a 7-minute clip I want to show from the documentary we made together. This has been, and so I feel like Ashley got shoved to the side too much, but you'll be around for the Parrot Room, and Ben, you're welcome to join in the Parrot Room as well if you have time. But here's a clip from a documentary film that I am not going to call The Last Election. Here it is.
Reagan would make America great again by surrendering to the Russians, right. Or, hey, you keep your wall. Walls are good. No, and yet somehow he's tapped into that sort of emotional, that nostalgia, that sense. Now, by the way, have you noticed the signs around Milwaukee, though? They're not, well, look at them. They're not Make America Great Again. They're Make America Safe Again. And I think that's it's a very interesting flex on his part.
A couple of times you've described Trump as reptilian.
Yeah.
Of course, he is a human being, not a reptile.
His brain is reptilian.
I wonder what kind of human being he is. Is he a demagogue? Is he a tyrant? Is he something else, something distinctly modern?
Oh, no, I don't think there's anything distinctly modern about him. I think he's the type that is well known to history. He's clearly a narcissist. He is somebody who I think is unmoored by actual principle. But when I would describe him as reptilian, what I'm saying is that there's always this debate, like, is he really, I mean, how smart is he? Is he this great strategic thinker? And I don't think he is necessarily. On the other hand, he has an instinct. He senses people's weakness, and he knows how to exploit it, and he knows what works. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about that instinct, which is very, very powerful, and that he has, and that a lot of politicians don't have. I mean, he does something at his rallies that is actually kind of interesting, which is that he pays really close attention to what works and doesn't work and the feedback. There are a lot of politicians who are almost, going to phase you. They don't take any feedback, but he does that.
Who is she?
Nobody.
Somebody.
We're good. We're good?
I don't think you can observe our political moment right now and think that democracy is anything but alive and extremely, extremely healthy. And I'll just give a few examples. Let's look at the Republican primary, okay? Nikki Haley, Donald Trump's closest competitor, outspent Donald Trump 2-1, okay? The entire political donor class of the Republican Party wanted Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis and quickly coalesced around Nikki Haley and gave her just millions and millions and millions of dollars, again, outspending Trump 2-1. She won 2 contests. She couldn't come close to him. What does that tell you? I mean, I remember as a young leftist getting exercised over Citizens United and thinking, money in politics or democracy is over. And it turns out that the will of the American people is simply cannot be in any way repressed. And, billions and billions of dollars are simply not equal to the American people showing up and having their say.
So we're here.
Yes.
It's 2024. We're at the Republican National Convention. Donald Trump is getting nominated. J.D. Vance is going to be his VP.
I changed my mind.
How did we get here? Where did we go wrong?
Our political system is completely broken. Americans are pissed at both parties. They don't feel like either party has listened to them. And there's a lot of truth to that. And Trump's a fucking demagogue, and he came along and fed them the bullshit they wanted to hear. And the rest is history. I think it's this sense that back in 1954, life was easy. I had that job in town. I married a woman. We raised our kids. There was right and wrong. There was no confusion. Men were men. Women were women. And this all changed real quick. And the political elites just fucking blew by. What should have happened is politicians should have sat down and educated people about this and talked to people that it's good to welcome immigrants no matter what the hell their color is or creed is or any of that. But politicians didn't listen to their fears and concerns. These folks became radicalized, and Trump took advantage of that, as all demagogues did.
So do you think that with the right rhetoric, with the right communication, the changes that we've gone through over the last 40 years could have been accepted by the public?
Oh, God, yeah. By most of the public. Most Americans are, I used to be a crazy right-winger. Most Americans are tolerant.
The vast majority of Americans think abortion should be legal for 15 weeks and really rare after that. And guess what? That's Donald Trump's position, right? So Donald Trump came out the gate, and if you look at every single policy agenda that he has laid out, it is one of those things that looks like it's polarizing, but actually it polarizes the elites. When you talk to working class Americans, you talk to average Americans, you talk to middle class Americans, they are totally united on these issues. I just wrote a book called Second Class. I traveled around the country. I interviewed working class Americans from all political persuasions. What I found was almost nothing separated what working class Democrats believe from what working class Republicans believe. The Democrats wanted much less immigration, and the Republicans wanted much more access to high quality healthcare. The Democrats were against abortion on demand. The Republicans were against banning abortion, okay? The Democrats wanted much less welfare. And the Republicans wanted much more help for working families, okay? There was just so little that divided them. The Democrats were very upset about the transgender agenda, and the Republicans were very pro-gay, okay? This is the American working class. This is the American electorate. It is radically, radically tolerant, radically, radically moderate.
Well, I think this is one where I think we all need to sort of go back and reevaluate our priors, you know, and not rely on the cliches, you know. What is, you know, I'm a small government constitutionalist. What does that actually mean? Well, It basically means that you want to create a country that is as good and decent, as Jimmy Carter said, good and decent as the American public.
All right. So that was the clip from the documentary about this election. And that was Batya Ungar Sargon, the woman there. That was Charlie Sykes of the Bulwark. And that was Joe Walsh, former Tea Party Republican, now never Trumper, that we interviewed. What do you remember all that, right? I mean, except for the part of the bar with the guy going fight, fight, fight. I don't know if you were there for that, but what do you make of that, or what does that bring to mind, Benjamin?
Yeah, the Joe Walsh interview was really something. His argument eventually in that interview, he suggests that if we did electoral reforms, that we could have multiple parties, as long as all of those parties remain bought and paid for by rich people. You know, because they have the freedom to donate, right? That's their First Amendment right. You could legitimate Reaganism for another 50 years because people would think that having 4 or 5 competitive parties would mean that they could be represented again in this system. And it would take them quite a long time for them to be in any way disabused of that. If people just had somebody who was closer to them in terms of the way that they looked, talked, sounded, acted in relation to all of this, they would tolerate this for a much longer period of time. And this view, people will be quick to dismiss it, but there is an element of truth to this. If you could do those kinds of procedural reforms, there are many ways that you can keep people thinking that there is something that this system will eventually do for them, something that it will eventually give them if only they work a little bit harder at it. And one of the great tricks of representative democracy over the years has been procedural reforms that create this appearance of dynamism and possibility that often isn't really there. And I think that one of the reasons that we've been having the problems we've been having is that we aren't able to use the constitutional amendment mechanisms to do those procedural reforms very easily anymore in this system. In the UK, you can do all kinds of funky things to make up for the fact that the state is declining, Britain is declining, and there's less that you can do. You could do Brexit, you can do second chamber reform, you can do devolution, you can create local governments and mayors, and you could putz around with the procedures. You can lower the voting age to 6, like David Runciman suggested, which I think would blow people's minds. They would think, wow, we can do all kinds of things now that we can vote.
They'd limit it.
Now that the
They'd start
teenagers
at
can
6
vote.
and end at 18 if they could.
Right. I mean, it's a fun thought experiment, right? Like, let's say that they did that. What if only people between the ages of 6 and 18 could vote? Would that get rid of the problem of capitalism? I don't think it would, right? But people would think that it would, and it would take them, 20 years to figure out that it doesn't? It would take at least a few election cycles, because the first time that they don't get
20 years of free
anywhere,
ice cream, so sorry.
Right, but this is a real window into how elites think. Joe Walsh's interview is a real window into how elites think. Same goes for the Charlie Sykes interview. Real windows into how these guys think. And it's very different, especially because these guys, as never Trump Republicans, they're really out. They have no chance of winning elections. They have no chance of taking office. Because they're never Trump Republicans and not just Democrats, they have no home. So they're able to be very candid with us. And one of the things I really appreciated about those guys was their honesty. Same goes for Bhatia. These people were very honest with us about what they really believe. But it shows a lot. And I think that really Joe Walsh is the one who had the view which was the closest to being the truth. If it really was the case that we could do those procedural reforms, people would be fooled about neoliberalism for a good long while yet.
Well, there's a section of the Bhatia interview where Danny, who by the way has an essay that I had meant to bring up, but we didn't get a chance to, in Sublation Magazine right now. It's called Report from the RNC, and it's very well worth reading. But Danny tries to ask Bhatia if she thinks that neoliberalism was successful, at least before it went into crisis, if it succeeded, and she just does not believe the question could be asked. The answer is so obviously no, but in fact, it did succeed because it held together the public as a voting, in a way that so they participated in politics and continued to reproduce society without tearing up the streets, without going into real major crisis. It succeeded. And so the question that is on the agenda for both parties right now is, what can we create that will kick this can down the road another 20, 30, 40 years? Maybe Joe Walsh's vision will be the one. So when I ask, okay, well, what can we see in Trump's agenda? How can we understand if he is going to be the winner today? How can we understand the meaning of that? And then I reach for, well, there's a anti-war sentiment there. There's an anti-state sentiment there. I'm trying to read the tea leaves to find something to hold on to that we could organize around more effectively. Well, we could try to address the general will of the public in a more authentic way, to be a Gen Xer about it in a more authentic way.
To be a Rousseauian about it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And Rousseauian about it. And so that's what I'm aiming at. I'm not trying to find the next way in which the capitalist system will devise a politics that will keep us in line for another generation or two or three, but rather during this transition to find an opening for a different kind of political organizing.
Yeah, but that is what's most likely, isn't it? That's what usually happens. And it's become easier for it to happen because the quality of our organization is degraded massively over time, right? We don't have the kinds of organizations we had in the 60s, much less in the 20s or in the 1880s, right? So I think one of the things that's gone on is that our credible threat of revolution has diminished massively, which means they don't have to do as much for us. They really don't. We've become much easier to keep on side in terms of the actual practical problem of just, can you continue to run this system? Can the modern state and capitalism both continue? We've become much less capable of overthrowing either one of those things, or of even presenting a credible threat.
Mm-hmm.
And
so what do they actually have to do?
Go ahead, Ashley.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
But also we're promised part of the spoils, because anybody who would have once seen themselves as part of that credible threat is now deunionized and precarious. And the people who are holding the flag for that are like, well, I'll take up that education position that you just mentioned. Oh, we didn't educate the masses on how great immigration is. I'll do that. Here you go. I've written up this curriculum. I got a grant to do that, and it will teach your kids. And that's how you'll figure out that what we're up to. We've also been, we've been part of it. We are part of the containment strategy ourselves.
Though, but we don't have to be. And one of the
no,
we are not. we are not. We are not. Okay, we're not part of it. None of us.
People here is what I'm saying.
No, but we educated people here are not part of that containment strategy, and I refuse to accept that role, and I'm not going to take my marching orders from Joe Walsh. The thing is, one thing we might have to our advantage is the defeat of the millennial left. If the millennial left can take that on board, and if the Zoomers can understand it, and if the Gen Xers that are still cognizant can understand it, if we could face this defeat, then we may not have all the material conditions we need. We may not have the organizations and institutions we need, but at least we'll know that we need them, rather than trying to pick out a piece of this policy or that party that does exist and say, this is what we are. And having said that, I want to encourage everyone to go out and vote for RFK Jr.'s brainworm, despite the fact that he did endorse, I think it's a him. The brainworm may not be a he. It's a them. They did endorse Kamala Harris. Apparently, I've been sent an article that RFK Jr.'s brainworm endorsed Kamala. Anyway,
I played a prank on my friend. I had my friend visiting from the UK. Somebody went to Cambridge with me, and I brought him along to show him how we vote. And then I wrote in his name while he was observing me vote, because if he objected to my doing it, then he would be interfering with my vote and would be committing a crime. So yeah, that was the game I played with my friend. I voted for him.
Well, what was his name?
His name is Rafe Gibson.
Go if you're not going to vote for RFK Jr.'s brainworm, vote for Benjamin Studebaker's foreign friend.
Right, all right, he's British. He can't actually win, so don't worry. You won't actually elect him. It can't happen.
Yeah. Listen, in about 10 minutes, we're going to start the Parrot Room. I'm going to end it here. I enjoyed this, and I'm enjoying making this documentary. I would enjoy it more if I could come up with a name for it. I'll see you in the Parrot Room in about 10 minutes.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around